Ba, 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 ba. This is Kevin reacts to some stupid video, which is incredibly wrong, and apparently this entire site is full of stupid, idiotic things that are wrong. I'm just going to call it stupid. So, before we start, let me just say one thing. There's a difference between doing what I do with like my science videos, as off and on that they are, or history commentary in the middle of me playing games or whatever, where I'm talking casually and I'm saying, oh yeah, this happened here, this general happened here, these things were connected, and they'll say, go look it up. This is really interesting, go look it up. Is what I'm doing is I'm just in a casual tone relating things that are enjoyable, something to learn, etc. I don't present it as an actual historically well researched curriculum or video, which could be used to teach at some educational standard. Unless I actually state that I'm doing it. Like I'm preparing a video now about C Sharp, Unity, programming things. That's well researched. I got numbers in there. I got other things in there. But usually I'm just talking off the cuff. This is something other than that. It's not talking off the cuff. It is literally showing and saying, this is what happened. And this video is, how did the American Civil War actually happen? So this guy's trying to correct all of the history and present well-researched history. First thing you should notice when you look at any videos like this. One, their name. Knowledgia. The fuck kind of name is that? But, anybody can have a catchy name. Do you see anything that suggests any sort of research in here? No. You don't see any sort of references. You don't see any sort of external links. You don't see any of that. This guy produced this series and many more series of videos. This is the chapter thing. Presenting it as if it's a fully researched production. And yet there's no bibliography or anything else. That should be your first clue that this guy knows dick all about what he's talking about. So I'm going to play portions of this video, and I'm going to point out what he says and why he's wrong about what he says. It's like he took some half-constructed notes from some history course that he really enjoyed and tried to shove them all together and say, this is what I learned, but it's what you should learn too, and it's 100% accurate, man. That type of bullshit. So let's listen to the video.
1819. The newly...
Okay, all right. We're off to an okay start, right? 1819. Okay, this is relatively correct. Newly born United States of America sat in a delicate balance, 11-11. 11 states that didn't have slavery and 11 states that did. Okay, all right, that's good. That's good. I'm going to compliment him on that. Let's continue.
Born United States of America sat in a state of delicate balance. 11-11. 11 free states, 11 slave states. From the outside looking in, it appeared to be perfect harmony. Equal states, equal representation, equal influence in federal affairs.
Okay, so the first thing that he does wrong is he shows us a map of the continental United States and its territories, and all he talks about are the states. Why the fuck do you even have the territories on here if you're not going to discuss them? First of all. Secondly, he seems to like to repeat 11 a lot, which tells me he's a fan of Spinal Tap, so he can't be all bad. But he's still bad. Thirdly, equal representation and equal influence in federal affairs. Oh, God. I blew my voice out with that laugh, with that cackle. Equal influence in federal affairs. The United States at this time had a weak federal government. I mean, this is after, I'm pretty sure this is after Jefferson. Yeah, because it has to be, because this is after the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson utterly destroyed the Central Federal Authority in by this time. Their federal affairs, there were very few things that were left to the federal government or federal authority. Almost everything was governed by states' rights. That included printing currency. And that was actually a big fight because, guy who was killed by Aaron Burr. God, let me look this up. Google, tell me who was killed by Aaron Burr. Alexander Hamilton. I should know that. I do know that. I'm just really tired. I've been up all night. Alexander Hamilton was trying to, in fact, actually, so did Aaron Burr. They were trying to establish a federalized currency in order to be recognized as a fully autonomous country. You would think that our revolution established us as a fully autonomous country. It did not. Not according to the metric set by so many of the European countries. Establishing and maintaining a currency that was regulated by a centralized federal government was one such condition. And during this period, states were still printing their own goddamn currency. See, currency, legal tender, is a banknote or a loan. And basically, the government is, you're the holder of a loan and ownership of the government. And it was believed by many during this period, many politicians, that states had a right to issue loans on themselves, in addition to the federal authority issuing loans on themselves to anybody who possessed that piece of paper, that legal tender. And if you look on your $1 bill, $5 bill, $2 bill, $10 bill, $20 bill, you will see related terminology. To this day, that's still how currency basically operates. And a lot of people don't realize that you don't really own money. You own or possess a note that says that the government owes you something. So it's not money in the way that you think it is. And this is why there is such a problem. This is for another video, but there's such a problem with instituting any sort of precious metals into a currency, because then you artificially enhance inflation. So inflation essentially becomes exponential if you don't have enough precious metals, as opposed to population growth. But that's incredibly complicated and not fit for a casual discussion like I'm having now. The math, I've shown people, even while in showing people the math, a lot of people have trouble grasping exactly what is being shown to them without serious in-depth explanation. But that's the basic idea: is that states, a lot of states, in fact, a lot of northern states, believe, in addition to the southern states, believe that states had the right to conduct business on their own, issue their own notes, and issue their own trade agreements. See, the idea of the original idea of the United States was that the United States essentially, what the best example to compare it to is the European Union. United States essentially thought they were building something that would be comparable to what the European Union is today, if you can make that connection. So territories had a similar issue because they didn't necessarily have seats in the Senate and House the way a real state had a seat in there. But they still had federal justices, they still had territorial justices, that sort of thing that they would appeal to back and forth. And so it's a really complicated thing, and he cuts out, look at the size of this map. He cuts out the Michigan Territory, the Missouri Territory, the Arkansas Territory, or Arkansas Territory, which is, if I remember correctly, how it was pronounced back then. And he just talks about 11 states saying they had equal influence over the federal government. First of all, federal government barely existed in 1819, thanks to Jefferson. Secondly, equal influence is stretching it. And I might as well explain it now, because a lot of people ask this question and it's not answered in this video. And the question is, why is there so much industry in the North and so much agriculture in the South? Agricultural businesses, the business of creating an agriculture, requires like 100 times more space than what is required to conduct industry. The North had a very short agricultural period throughout the year. And keep in mind, uncommonly strong winters were happening toward the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. Ignoring any debate, modern debate about climate change, there are cycles that the Earth goes through. And a cold snap was hitting it. And I've seen some people argue that it was a 100-year cycle. Some people argue it was a 50-year cycle. But the cycle still covered the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th. And there was a cycle that happened during some of the first settlements. Cycles that the various American tribes recorded in their oral history. So there are cycles and periods of cold and warm, and the North was hit hardest out of all of them. So when you have an agricultural base where you need 10 acres for one crop, 100 acres for another crop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're going to put those in your most soil-rich, growing-rich locations. And that's how you get the southern states. And the northern states, which have some agriculture, are able to build machines in structures, regulate the temperature for those machines, etc., and then process the raw materials that are brought up from the south. And this type of machinery doesn't actually do that well in the South because of humidity. So it's almost like a developmental necessity that the North would become industrial and the South would become agricultural. And that is the biggest debate that happened during the formation of our country in the First Continental Congress, and or from then on, people were debating. Listen, we can't have the agriculture up north. We have to have it in the south, and we need labor. But your industry and your trade that's functioning up north, you want to pay bottom dollar. And so that's how they managed to screw everyone who was a slave out of their rights at the formation of this country. And why they did that? Because of trade. Because of money. The North liked slavery. The North didn't hate slavery. And I'll get to more of that at the end of the video, because there are laws that are still on the books in places like New York that were born out of slave labor. Laws that people have been trying to get to remove for decades. And they're still there. And a lot of people don't realize that they are slave laws. So he got a lot of shit wrong already. And it's based off of the presentation of this map and the idea that everything was on the outside looked equal. On the outside looking in, the United States didn't look like a country. It didn't look like a country at all. And Britain even, because they got involved with the Civil War and War of 1812 and the Civil War, Britain thoroughly believed, there were people in Britain who thoroughly believed that the colonies were going to fall apart because they had yet to firmly establish a central federal authority and basically abolish the ideas of little fiefdoms or city-states. That's not discussed in the video either. So let's continue with the video, though.
But this was only from the outside looking in. In reality, there was no focus on balance for the Americans. Instead, all that mattered now was expansion. Manifest destiny.
I don't even get more than how long? I've spent 18 minutes describing how the first 15 or 30 seconds of this video is fucked. And now I'm up to the first 50 seconds of the video, and I have to explain this. This is where everything took a nosedive for me when I was watching this video. Manifest destiny, that was the reason why the United States government was hell-bent on expanding westward. Bull fucking shit! And if you look down here, this guy knows he's throwing bullshit at the screen. Because he writes, Manifest Destiny, 19th century. He doesn't give the actual date that Manifest Destiny was coined. You know why he doesn't give the actual date Manifest Destiny was coined? It's because Manifest Destiny was not coined in 1819. Manifest Destiny was coined in 1845. And it was coined by a writer, not even a member of any government. It was coined by a writer who was giving what we would call today a retcon of why people moved west. And not only did this writer not say specifically the United States, he said It is the nature of people to expand. And there's only one place to expand, and that's westward. I'm paraphrasing to cut down on the huge thing. That's what he says. And that's when, so he's talking about humanity in general, saying humanity's desire is to expand. That's why God gave us this land. And so God gave us the mandate that we must expand. And the only way to expand is to expand westward. Manifest Destiny is a giant fucking excuse for what was already going on as a result of racism, as a result of a retaliation, as a result of elitism. Basically, every ism you can think of was happening on the eastern coast. People didn't want to have the immigrants around because they were dirty. Send them out west. People didn't want to have slaves around, free black men. Send them out west or send them down south, you know. People didn't want to have people who wanted to start controlling various forms of agriculture. They couldn't get into the land that was already claimed. You had to go out west to do that. And finally, you had the military opposition to the American tribes. The American tribes that fought against the colonists in two major wars. Actually, there were some that fought against the United States in the War of 1812. So you had like three major wars where various tribes who were not peacefully coexisting and did not want peaceful coexistence, where they brutally massacred and assaulted essentially colonists and second generation colonists, third generation colonists who had largely been forced to move to the Americas. During the French and Indian War, the Revolutionary War, and parts of it during the War of 1812, on the premise that these countries, France and Britain, were promising better standing, great trade, and ownership of land. And that's another thing about the myth of the American tribes saying, we don't own the land. That's so much bullshit. Case in point, the Sioux of the South Dakotas. Oh God, I can't remember. Is it the Blackfoot or Blackfeet? They're two different tribes. One of them is one side of the country. The other's the one that was around the Black Hills. Anyway, the point is that Sioux in that area wanted full control over the Black Hills. And they massacred and slaughtered the Cheyenne, if I remember correctly. You know what? Let's look that up. Let's see here. No, in Cheyenne. Yeah, this is actually wrong. Don't trust AI. Google AI. I'm not talking about the 1876. I'm talking about 1770s. Oh, right here. Lakota pushed the Cheyenne out of the Black Hills. Right, this is the one I'm talking about. See, this one thought that I was talking about when they grouped together. Yeah, the Lakota Sioux and Northern Cheyenne did wind up, joining forces to fight against the United States in order to reclaim the territory that they lost. But in the 1770s, and a little bit before, and on through after, the Lakota brutally slaughtered the Cheyenne in order to assert full control over the Black Hills. And they did so with the military arms that they traded from the French and the British. And I can't remember which tribe it was, but they were supposed to fight against the colonists. They get the weapons, and then they said, we're going to take our land first. And the idea was that they were, European countries, European traders were going to help the Lakota take over the land after they fought the colonists. And this one tribe, or a couple tribes, said, "No, we're going to go after our land first." So they went after the Cheyenne, got rid of them, and then didn't fight the colonists. But that's a minute, that's a small little part of what went on, and it takes it's just a little factoid. It's not even the big picture. The big picture is that the tribes that were against the colonists fought a brutal war, and at one point the massacres that they committed upon upon people that had nothing to do with the Revolutionary War, that had nothing to do with attacking any Indian tribes, they slaughtered those colonists with such brutality that you had almost all of the leading generals of the Revolutionary War write in their diaries about how they're going to devote their life to wiping out the native tribes, where they used to believe in living in coexistence, peaceful coexistence. Now they felt it was their duty to eliminate them, since peaceful coexistence couldn't be had. They're very horrible letters based off of some horrible events from a few tribes. But of course, in all wars of genocide, which those few tribes willfully participated in against the colonists willfully participated in against a few of those tribes, it turned into a massive division where there was no, it was going to be us or them. And that's how we wound up with the current state of the situation. And the tribes thought, well, based off of normal population growth, we should overcome the colonists. Except we're talking about a country that was being formed from the throwaways of other European countries. If a person was facing hardship in some European country, in whether or not it was Britain or Ireland or Spain or France or Germany, whatever, they were forced out of their homes in Europe, forced to go west because they had no power, and they stick up, plant their roots, stick up stakes, that sort of thing, tent poles, and say, "This land is now ours. We're going to farm, and we're going to live on our own." Essentially, they were refugees coming from Europe. The vast majority of this country was founded not just on immigrants, but on refugees. And some of the tribes understood that. And some of the tribes worked with them. There are stories of successful coexistence, of successful, land sharing, of successful township forming. And there are also, but the problem is there are more stories of horrific slaughters. And, people like involved in like the Meeker massacre, slaughtering, just killing people, whether it was a native tribesman or whether American tribesmen or colonials. It was horrible. And so 1845, when this asshole writer coined Manifest Destiny, what he was doing was saying, we're justified in whatever we do because humanity has to expand. God gave humans the right to expand. And that works all ways. It also worked for the tribes that came over on the land bridge, the tribes that came over across the Pacific, the Polynesians that landed, the tribes that, the Lakota that slaughtered the Cheyenne in order to gain control over the Black Hills. The constant warring. That is the history of humanity. And this guy was basically trying to explain why humans have that biological drive and need and social need to expand. It was a retcon, essentially, or a retrospective reimagination of why do we do this. It was not a political mandate. And this asshole makes it look like it was a political mandate from the United States government written in 1819. Nothing about how this is presented is even remotely close to the facts. They don't talk about the massacres that happened to the native tribes, to the colonists, or the British onto the colonists, or the French onto the colonists onto the French. He doesn't discuss any of that. He says the reason why the United States government was hell-bent on westward expansionism. No, it's not the reason. It's not the reason. It's an explanation that was added 30 years after 1819. And this asshole knows it. That's why he put down 19th century at the bottom here. Right here. 19th century instead of giving the actual date or the actual person who coined the term. Let's keep watching.
Reason why the United States government was hell-bent on snagging more and more territory. Although the phrase wouldn't be coined until the mid-1800s, the belief held by many Americans that it was the nation's destiny to
Not only was it not coined until the mid-1800s, but it wasn't a thing until the mid-1800s. The expansionism was not manifest destiny. The explanation was manifest destiny for other things going on. For revenge, for racism and classism of people kicking the immigrants out of the eastern seaboards, forcing them to go west. This guy doesn't get anything right in regards to that. Not one thing.
to expand westward as far as can be done, drove the U.S. to do just that. Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, Rhode Island, Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Louisiana.
Notice how much time this guy is wasting by naming things that are already on the goddamn map.
Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, and Alabama. That was the whole of the United States thus far as of 1819.
Include the goddamn territories. You have them there on the map. Mention the territories. By the way, he doesn't, not until it's convenient.
But only a year later, this would change. In 1818, the Missouri Territory, previously obtained as part of the Louisiana Purchase, began its push for statehood. The following year, the District of Maine would be allowed to break off from Massachusetts and do the same. It didn't take long for this to cause a conundrum for the contemporary U.S., however, because the addition of two more states had the potential to upset the numerical balance between slave states and free states. On the one hand, Northerners and pro-abolitionists in Congress argued that the addition of Missouri, which seemed to quickly lean toward wanting to become a slave state, would expand slavery and thus bring them further away from their goals. The Southerners, though, were obviously in favor of adding another slave state, and thus argued that any new candidate for statehood should have the right to decide for themselves, just as the first 13 colonies which side on the fence they want to fall on. The debate in both the House of Representatives and the Senate would continue into 1819, at which point Maine was now brought into the mix, as Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House at the time, suggested that Missouri should be added to the Union as a slave state, but that Maine should also be added, contrarily, as a free state. This proposal was subsequently debated into yet another year, when in 1820 the Senate added to the bill, requiring that any other territories north of the 36° 30' latitude line that had been agreed upon below Missouri's lower border could only enter the Union as free states. With everyone finally in some level of agreement, the Missouri Compromise was signed into law. This triggered a tit-for-tat war of adding one new slave state for every new free state and vice versa, starting with Arkansas in 1836.
A tit for tat war? Ugh.
Michigan the next year, and Florida in 1845. And since Florida was a slave state, it was assumed that the next territory to enter the Union and statehood would be another free state. But this became complicated when Texas had a demanding request for the United States: annex us now.
This is where we get to another massive, massive fucking problem. Um, he covers some things that are correct. They're factually correct, but it's like a situation where um, correlation and causation are separate. You know, uh, and he confuses them in the worst fucking way possible. And he does it in a way where he doesn't discuss why. He doesn't say why Texas wanted to be annexed. In fact, he misrepresents what was going on in Texas. See, part of the slave trade wasn't just coming, because slavery was more, it was, yeah, I mean, slave ships weren't really coming over from the Atlantic side. You know, in the way that they used to. In fact, let me see here. Let me get the state right. International slave trade was made illegal in 1808. And so I wanted to make sure I got that date right. It was the act prohibiting importation of slaves. So we actually had been running, I think it was the USS Constitution and a couple, I can't remember the other ones, but they're like, I think it's like 4 or 5, maybe as a few more. There weren't too many because we really didn't have much of a navy or the capacity to supply one. But we had a few ships out there that were meant to stop slave ships from coming over. And some of the worst horrific offenses during the whole chattel slavery period after 1808 were slave traders who would dump their cargo, in other words, human beings, who were shackled and chained to wooden, wooden, sometimes a wooden, I don't want to say pillars, but wooden logs, in order to help them sink to the ground, or sink to the bottom of the ground of the ocean, bottom of the ocean. And they would do that if they caught a ship like the Constitution coming out and saying, "Oh, are they a slave ship? We're going to check it out," because it was illegal to do that. So, slave states, southern states, found a way around that. They traded through the Spanish-Mexican-owned Spanish territories / Mexican territories. You know, when the Mexico finally got its independence from Spain, across through to California. And this is a big fucking deal that this guy doesn't mention this in this video. Because Texas was more or less infiltrated by the slave trader barons. And these slave trader barons positioned themselves across, you know, from this eastern portion of Texas, you know, just east of where the flag is on that video, on all the way through to, you know, that little notch over there in California. And why they did that was to ensure that slaves who were illegally traded, illegally brought over, were properly shuttled through non-free states in order to continue to supply fresh slaves to the South. And part of the Missouri Compromise, you know, you got the one state for one and one state for another. Part of the problem is that the slave traders did not want to allow federal oversight over what they were doing. They didn't want to give the army the authority to discover, hey, illegal slave trading is going on. They didn't want any free states to appear underneath that, you know, the line, which is at the, let's see here. Essentially like, you know, below the Mason-Dixon line, basically is what that line corresponded to, among other things. You know, I mean, just the idea that anything that was south of the Missouri Compromise line, you know, Mason-Dixon line, whatever, they wanted to make sure that no state that came in under that line was automatically a free state. And so the U.S. government wasn't opposed to Texas joining. But if you notice, he used the term annex. And he doesn't explain why. The United States could annex the territory without having federal jurisdiction over it. And the people of the United States government said, wait, no, we know what you're going to do. We know there's a slave trade going through there. You have to come in as an official state. And they refused. Because these people who were controlling Texas, white slave traders, of course, you know, Spanish slave trading barons, they were white too because they were European. They didn't want to concede to that. And throughout this whole time, Spanish and Mexican forces had a dwindling influence on anything above the Rio Grande. And at one point, like when Santa Anna tried to go back in and reassert control over Texas, it had been something like 30 years since the last military, maybe it wasn't 30, maybe it was 20 something. No, it's like 24 years, if I remember correctly, since the last expedition from Mexico or military presence was felt, let alone taxes collected above the Rio Grande. So I think it was 1818 when that was the last time that happened. So Mexico was still claiming ownership over these lands, but they weren't collecting taxes. They weren't governing the people. There was no communication. Santa Anna tried to essentially reconquer people who said, we're not going to pay you taxes. Go fuck yourself, man. Go back home. You stopped caring about us. You stopped protecting us from attacks from the local tribes. You stopped dealing with us. You didn't send us any food. You didn't trade with us. You stayed isolated down there in Mexico. And you now come up here and you want to take our money and you want to tax us and you want to claim that we're part of yours? Piss off. That was the real attitude that went on. This guy proceeds to paint it up as a U.S. invasion of this territory. Now, the U.S. did go down to Mexico. But at this point, what you really have were the people of Texas, they were petitioning to become a state of the United States because they were, as far as they were concerned, they were conducting trade with the United States. The slave owners who were running the legislature in Texas said, we don't want to become a state in the United States. And the United States said, well, we can't send troops onto foreign territory unless you declare you're part of the United States. That's actually the real reason why, if you want to talk about what actually happened, that's actually the real reason why we didn't send our troops to the Alamo during the whole fight with the Alamo, because Texan lawmakers refused to agree to become a state of the United States, because that would fuck everything for the slave trade. That would absolutely fuck everything. So eventually, Santa Anna, he talks about us provoking them. Well, Santa Anna walked in and slaughtered a lot of people. When was that? Let me make sure I get my time right. Right, the Alamo Battle of the Alamo. 1836 to February 23rd, 1836 to March 6th, 1836. Essentially, that was when Santa Anna was going forward. And I'm pretty sure that's the time period he's talking about now, because Texas wanted nothing to do with being part of the United States. The lawmakers. The people wanted to become part of the United States. Because Santa Anna, when he started coming up, they knew he was brutal. Mexico had already been fucking around. So that's it. That's the whole problem here. And he doesn't cover that. Instead, what he does is he misrepresents Manifest Destiny, even though he says, well, the term wasn't be coined until later on. It's all utter bullshit. Essentially, he gave false information, and then he directly contradicted himself. And even then, he still gave false information. And then, at this point, he makes it look like America was the aggressor, when it's more a situation of disincorporated people who Mexico said, well, you're part of Mexico. And they said, like fucking hell we are. You haven't been up here since 1818. We're more American now and than we are Mexican from a citizen standpoint. On to the idea of the U.S. provoking Mexico into attacking. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't even mention the name Santa Anna. Let's watch it.
The history of Texas has been a roller coaster thus far, and yet it was only now preparing for its biggest climb yet. Texas, up until recently a part of Mexico after being freed from the grip of the Spaniards, wanted to join a different union, the USA. The Texans' pleas were initially ignored by the U.S. government.
Here's where I say he gives false information. The U.S. government did not ignore the pleas. The U.S. government gave Texas an ultimatum. They said, we cannot march or claim you as part of us unless you agree to statehood. And they said, no, we just want to be a territory. They said no, because then we can't march our military in there. There's still a problem going on with Mexico. So he lied about this entire section, and he did it to cut out everything I just said to you.
Which wasn't in much favor of annexing the nearby territory, with growing pressure from Britain for Texas to be an independent nation and America's undeniable thirst for expansion.
Here's where I talked about it earlier. Britain gets involved in every war with America that's on North America, from French and Indian War because it's their colonies, to the Revolutionary War because it wants to retain control of the colonies, to the War of 1812 where it wants to reassert control over the colonies, to the Civil War. And that includes this. And why does Britain want Texas? Because of the bay. There are like 5 major port areas that you see on this map right now. I can't really point them out because I don't have my thing on it. But 2 of the ones down in the Gulf of Mexico, New Orleans, and then I believe it's Galveston was the big bay at that period. I may be wrong. It may not have been Galveston. It may have been something else. Let's see here. What was the... Hey, Google, what was the major military location in Texas in the 1800s? I should have said bay. Military bay. Oh. Well, it looks like I clearly didn't phrase it right. But there are some major forts down there in Texas that were strategically placed. I mean, there was Fort Sam Houston. Fort Bliss was founded in 1848. That was too far after. But I forget. I think it was near Galveston, though. I might be wrong. Go look it up. Unlike him, I'm not telling you that's what it is for sure because I didn't prepare and I'm lazy. But this Texas was poised as a major military defensive point. So you have one here, then you have the New Orleans over here. You can't see my mouse. So you have Texas on one side, New Orleans on another, then the tip of Florida, and then you have Cuba. And if you could, which I believe was at that time was controlled by France, I may be wrong. But the point is, if you establish your bases along that coastline, you control all trade for the northern third of the Gulf of Mexico, militarily. That's why Britain wanted Texas. Texas was currently trading with Britain. In fact, all of the southern states were currently trading with Britain. And I don't know if it was in my past, failed attempt of the video where I mentioned this, but I'll mention it if I mentioned it already in this video. By the time of the Civil War, Britain controlled 1/3 through debt, 1/3 of the land masses of the Confederate states, of the southern states. Britain was trying to reassert control over the United States. And it was thought that the Civil War would have been a prime way to do that. So, this is just awful and terrible and stupid. I'm going to skip ahead, because this is turning into a really long React video. So down here, fanning of the flames. God, I'm not even 5 minutes in. It's so awful. A fanning of the flames and the Dred Scott case. If you watch this video, there are 2 things that he does. One, he claims that John Brown The abolitionists, the violent abolitionists, I mean really violent. He brutally slaughtered pro-slavery people, which is both good and bad. Uh, he claimed them as the major causes of the Civil War. The Dred Scott case had absolutely no effect on whether or not the Civil War would be fought. It did have an effect on the Emancipation Proclamation. And I'm going to explain this because I'm pretty sure the teacher tried to explain this to him, to the Schuyler guy who wrote the script, and the Schuyler guy didn't grasp it. Dred Scott was important because it labeled every slave as property as opposed to a human being. And the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't an end to slavery by any stretch of the imagination. That would have been the 13th Amendment, right? I better not get that one wrong. 13th Amendment. Yes. Yes! I am so tired. I am tired. And my mom is tired. I've been up since 3 o'clock, and it is 11 a.m. Anyway, the Emancipation Proclamation, because it declared everybody as property, there is a custom that dates back to basically, it was legally in place by Queen Elizabeth I. And she used it. The past kings used it too, but it was like formally declared in a really big way during her reign in Britain. And that was that when you are involved in war with an enemy combatant, any property of that enemy combatant can be legally used by you in any way you see fit to carry on your war. And she used that to empower privateers. And that's the difference between a privateer and a pirate. A privateer has legal authority of the monarchy to assault and steal property owned by any member, civilian or military, of your enemy, and then appropriate that property for wartime efforts to defeat the enemy. I don't know what that law is called. It's too old for me to know. But without saying it, Lincoln merely used it. And what a lot of people don't know is that the majority of our laws in this country are inherited from English law. And there are times where even the Supreme Court has gone back to English law, the time before the Declaration of Independence, and looked at those guiding principles to see if they're in line with the future movement of the country and our principles, and to make rulings. In fact, there are some laws that have been canonized in American law, which date back even to the French, and I think there are a couple of them, if I remember correctly, a couple of them actually dated back to the Roman Empire. It's really interesting, like the source of transmission for those laws. Really fascinating. But anyway, the point is this particular law is basically the law that empowered privateers. And as a country, we use that law, even in 1812. Essentially, Jean Lafitte was empowered by that law at the Battle of New Orleans, and in order to defeat the British, etc. So what Lincoln did was he said, okay, Oh, my phone. And it's not something I'm going to answer. Um, what Lincoln did was said, with his Emancipation Proclamation, he said, all of the property of my enemy is now my property, and I'm going to emancipate that property. So for a brief moment, Lincoln owned and proclaimed his ownership over every slave in the South. And so he was the largest slave owner, technically, legally, in this country. And he was the largest manumitter in this country, because he made sure every single one of those slaves were now granted the status of a person. But he didn't use those exact words. The funny thing is, President Douglas, right? Let's see. Let me make sure I get the name right. President of the Confederacy. I said Douglas. Jefferson Davis. See, when I get something wrong, I'm more than happy to show you that I'm willing to correct it. Jefferson Davis wrote this nasty, nasty note about how the North is coming to steal your property. That's what it was about. He wrote it after the Gettysburg Address, basically. That's what it was about. The North are stealing our heritage. Blah 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 blah. A lot of people who study history don't understand the context. They go to a couple classes. They don't ask the who's or whys. They just say, "Oh, this is the date. This is the name. This is important." They don't understand the causation and the effect. And that is what is important about Dred Scott. That's also why the Emancipation Proclamation didn't touch any slaves that were owned in the North, because they weren't part of the Confederacy. They had to wait for the 13th Amendment to be passed before they could be freed. And I get so tired of trying to explain this to people. Like, Juneteenth has nothing to do with anything regarding freeing slaves across the country. If they weren't the first, they weren't the last slaves that had to be formally freed. It only dealt with Texas. But now, ever since then, people somehow think that Juneteenth, the Emancipation Proclamation, and Juneteenth was the date that all slaves were free. No! No! They're not even getting the Emancipation Proclamation correct. In fact, the general that went down there in Texas on June 19th, that's what it was, right? June 19th, I'm pretty sure. He referenced the Emancipation Proclamation incorrectly. He should have been mentioning the 13th Amendment, because by that time, the Emancipation Proclamation was no longer in effect. It was only a wartime executive order. It was not a peacetime executive order. So even the general got it wrong. And that was a contemporary general. So this guy doesn't get the Dred Scott case right. Doesn't get the effect of the Dred Scott. Oh, he sort of gets the Dred Scott case right. He gets the dates and the people's names correctly. But he doesn't get the effect it had on the country, and he doesn't get why it had the effect on the country. And that is a huge problem with this video. It's just awful. But before he even gets to Dred Scott, he talks about John Brown, right? He doesn't fucking talk about bleeding Kansas. Bleeding Kansas was a series of wars that lasted from 1854. Despite a resolution in 1859, there were still violent assaults going on through 1861. And people who live now today where it happened in the then Kansas territory. By the way, nowhere on this map does he show the Kansas territory by that time. I mean, let me double check. I'm pretty sure he doesn't change the names. Oh wait, no, he does. He does. Sort of.
Why did things
God.
or to fight over?
Oh no, he doesn't even properly list it as the Kansas territory. He doesn't even do that. God. So he doesn't even get his map right. He doesn't even get the goddamn map right. So, the point is, Bleeding Kansas, by people who live there now even, and even in history books, and you see reporters that were writing about it in contemporary newspaper accounts, refer to Bleeding Kansas as the start of the Civil War, 1854. And it wasn't started by John Brown. Instead, he refers to John Brown and his assault on Harper's Ferry. That was like one minor event compared to everything else that went on. The only reason why that's even known about is that the Confederates made a song of John Brown and mocked him, and then the Union soldiers said, okay, we're going to mock you right back. And they would sing John Brown as they went right through and rolled over the Confederate armies. This is the biggest fucking problem with this entire video. This guy should not be writing anything at this point, because there's so much misleading. Skylar J. Gordon, there's so much misleading information in here. Lack of actual follow-up with facts that I had to make this react video. It is an awful video, and I'm up to an hour of tearing apart. I didn't even go into deep details here. Don't watch. I mean, I can't tell you what to do. You could go ahead and watch this guy, but this is crap. This is utter crap. I'm going to link the video here so you guys can, if you want to look at it yourself, you can go into it. But it just utter friggin' crap. 23 minutes, and he got so much wrong here. Let's see here. What are these credits here? Special thanks to, I'm assuming this is a Patreon list. I can't deal with this level of crap anymore. I gotta go. That's my reaction to the shit that I watched. And people are looking at it saying, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's really important. He's literally destroying history by giving people misleading information or facts in a misleading way, while withholding other far more important information in an egregious presentation that just, oh God, I need to stop right now. I'm actually getting more worked up. This is fucking awful. This whole thing is fucking awful.